and clear?
And can you see my slides on screen?
Yeah, we can see your slides. All right. So today we will begin with Professor Taiken Kuma. He is the Associate Professor of Humanities at my University, Japan, and he will be talking on the Indian Buddhist monasteries and secularity from the Gupta period onward, introduction to the Vihar project. Just to give a brief introduction of our speaker, Taiken Kuma is Associate Professor of Humanities at my university. He received his Dr. Phil in Buddhist Studies from University of Vienna 1999. His research focuses mainly on Buddhist logic and epistemology, and he currently is leading a research project on Indian Buddhist monasteries from the Gupta period onwards. Welcome, Dr. Taiken, and we will begin with your presentation.
So thank you very much for the kind introduction. Good morning, everyone. I'm Taiken Kuma from Yale University, Japan. It is my great pleasure to be able to participate in such a wonderful conference. I'd like to express my deepest gratitude to the organizers who kindly allowed me to join the conference online and to introduce my Bihara project that is closely related to India. The starting point of the Bihara project, funded by the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science, JSPS, was to reconsider. It is a well-known fact that a certain number of great monasteries were still active around the 13th century. The decline of Indian Buddhism has often been associated with the rise of Tantric Buddhism. Nevertheless, recent studies clearly show that the system of Tantric Buddhism developed as a whole in late Indian Buddhism, even though it was under the influence of Hinduism. In any case, it will be necessary to reconsider the assumption that Indian Buddhism is Tantric Buddhism. So we have been trying to throw light on the decline of Indian Buddhism from different angles, focusing on the tradition of Buddhist monasteries from the Gupta period onward. And thanks to the project members who did their research very energetically during the first research term, from 2018 to 2022, we were able to proceed to the next stage of the project from 2022 to 2026, which will be dedicated to elucidating the relationship between monasteries and secularity. In my presentation, first I will give an outline of the interdisciplinary project consisting of several research teams, and then introduce its research activities and future plans. So first, let me begin by explaining the background of the Bihara project, that is the Vikramashila project. As is well known, Vikramashila is a center for late Indian Buddhism and late Tantric Buddhism. And the Vikramashila project consists of two granting aims. The aim of the first one was to clarify how the superiority of Tantric doctrines to non-Tantric doctrines is explained by the monks of Vikramashila. And the aim of the second one was to elucidate how non-Tantric doctrines, such as Madhyamaka, are incorporated into Tantric doctrines by the monks of Vikramashila. And the outcome of the Vikramashila project was published in the series of Oriental Culture in 2016, and in the series of the Journal of the International Association of Buddhist Studies in 2018. And the conclusion of the Vikramashila project was that The system of Tantric Buddhism developed to the whole in late Indian Buddhism, even though it was under the influence of Hinduism. And this conclusion led us to the next project, that is Bihara project. And the aim of the Bihara project is to consider the decline of Indian Buddhism from different angles, focusing on the tradition of Indian Buddhist monasteries as a visible factor in the history of Indian Buddhism from the Gupta period onward. And the term Vihara monastery itself has different aspects or meanings, such as architecture, basis for spiritual practice or worship, junction of Laukika, mundane, and Lokottara, super mundane. And to fulfill this aim, it is necessary to organize an interdisciplinary project consisting of different research teams. So the formation of our research teams is as follows. The first one, the team of management supervision, and the second one, team of manuscripts. And the chief is Professor Izumi Miyazaki from Kyoto University. And the third one, the team of epigraphy. Chief is Professor Ryosuke Furui from the IASA, the University of Tokyo. And the fourth one, the team of Indian archaeology and history of art. Chief is Professor Akira Shimada from the State University of New York at New Paltz. And the fifth one, the team of the ITLR database. Chief is Dr. Toru Tomabechi from the International Institute for Digital Humanities in Tokyo. And sixth is the team of evaluation. Chief is Professor Satoshi Ogura from Tokyo University of Foreign Studies, and Professor Erika Forte from Kyoto University. So this one is a chart of the research team tasks. The first one, this team is responsible for the reconsideration of the decline of Indian Buddhism. And the second one, the team of manuscripts. They are in charge of the investigation of tantric and non-tantric doctrines taught in monasteries. And the third and fourth, they are expected to investigate various functions of monasteries from different angles. ITLR is the abbreviation for Indo-Tibetan Lexical Resource, organized by professors from University of Hamburg, the University of Hamburg. So we are in collaboration with University of Hamburg also. And they are creating a database of monasteries. Yeah, in collaboration with University of Hamburg. And the team of evaluation. Yeah, they are evaluating the direction of the project from outside, that is from the perspective of other religions or of other areas. So next we go on to each team's research activities. The first one team on management supervision. Here I'd like to summarize each research team's activities in the last research term. The first team held two symposiums. The first one is we had a project kickoff symposium in 2018. And the second one, we had a project online symposium. Different approaches to Indian Buddhist monasteries from the Gupta period onward in 20 presentations. My own presentations were as follows. The first one, rethinking the decline of Indian Buddhism perspectives on Buddhist monasteries from the Gupta period onward. Professor Himanshu Prabha Rai from JNU kindly asked me to give a presentation on the project at the India International Center in 2019. And second one was in Vienna. I had a presentation at the University of Vienna. It's in India. And we published the project newsletters, Japanese and English versions. They are now available online at the site of Mie University Scholarly e-collections. So please try to download each file after my presentation. And the progress report in Japanese in the series of archaeological journal. And we also created a website for the project, mainly for high school students in Japan. Actually, I was asked to introduce the project to Japanese high school students by one of the coaching schools in Japan. Actually, it was a little bit embarrassing to me, but I tried to create a website for the project in Japanese. And flyer. Our speakers were Professor Annette Schmidt-Ken, Professor Julia Shaw, and Professor Michael Willis, and Professor Alexis Sanderson. And the second one. And the website for high school students. So now the second team's research activities. Monasteries and doxography in Indian Buddhism. That is one of the workshops organized by the research team of manuscripts, held online in 2020. Yeah, due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Let me quote from, just a quote from the workshop's abstract. As is commonly accepted, Buddhist doxographical literature is of great use to scholars who treat Indian Buddhism as a system of thought and practice. In recent years, there has been much discussion and reconfiguration of Buddhist doxography due to the vigorous study of newly discovered manuscripts. It is also expected that such manuscripts will throw light on the curriculums of Buddhist monasteries. The aim of this international online workshop is to read a few unpublished yet important manuscripts and to discuss the relationship between monasteries and doxography in Indian Buddhism. We will also take into account the possibility that fundamental sources of fragments on head media, Buddhist logic, etc., may have been copied and shared by Buddhist monasteries, and thus were silently incorporated into certain doxographical texts. And we may be able to suppose such a hypothetical scheme. That is, there was an educational network of monasteries, and it also served as a monastic network of fundamental sources or fragments, and they shared such sources or fragments. And it should also be noted that monasteries may have functioned as scriptoriums for such hate media texts or for Mahayana texts. The flyer for the workshop. So the next one is the theme of epigraphy. They organized an international workshop entitled Epigraphic Evidence on Patronage and Social Context of Buddhist Monasteries in Medieval South and Southeast Asia in 2019. This was organized by the team of epigraphy. Quoted from the workshop's concept note by Professor Arlo Griffiths and Professor Ryosuke Furui. The workshop attempts to address the following questions related to Buddhist viharas. Who were the patrons and how were they located in local power structure? Related to this, what were the relations between viharas and temporal powers? Second, what were the forms of patronage and how were they connected with the economy and subsistence of particular periods or the regions? Third, what was the social context of Buddhist viharas? In other words, what was the structure of the societies in which viharas were located and their relation and interaction with monastic institutions? And vital issues in the workshop are viharas as junctions of Laukika and Lokuttara and influence of viharas in South Asia on those in Southeast Asia. The outcome of the workshop will soon be published in the series of Buddhism, Law and Society as a special issue. The flyer for the workshop. Then the next one is the theme of Indian archaeology and history of art. Yeah, panel, symposium, and workshop, yeah, in New York City and online, and in Georgia at the University of Georgia in the US. And they also conducted field surveys very energetically in Andhra Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, and Bihar, and Western Deccan, Western Malwa, Chhattisgarh, and Odisha in 2019 and 2020. And their publication is on the regional development of early medieval Buddhist monasteries in South Asia. Yeah, in the series of readers, working paper 34. And flyer for the symposium. Yeah, this was held online. And this is a flyer for the Georgia workshop. And this is a publication of this research team. And regarding this research team, I would also like to introduce one of the recent articles by Professor Abhishek Singh Amar. He's one of the key members of the research group. Yeah, investigating networks of patronage, society and Sangha in the early medieval Magadha in this book. So Professor Amar states that there has been undue emphasis on the role of regional powers like the Palas and on great monasteries, Mahaviharas. According to him, it is necessary to focus on a number of smaller monastic sites and their networks of patronage with the local society and polities. And the database team. The ITLR database is expected to play the role of a platform for exchanging or sharing information relevant to monasteries. We have been working on a number of entries, for example, Somapra, Nalanda, Bodh Gaya, Odantapri, Jagattara, Gomati, Kota, etc., to publish them on the website of the ITLR by the end of the research term. And entries such as Vikramshila have already been published. Yeah, I'd like to ask you to visit this website after my presentation. Yeah, and the database format looks like this. This is the entry for Vikramashila, linked with many panditas. Yeah, the monks of Vikramashila. So it looks as if many monks related to Bikramashila were gathering here at this monastery. And this research team is in charge of evaluating the project's direction from outside. Yeah, as I said, from the perspective of other areas such as West Asia, Central Asia, and Southeast Asia, or of other religions such as Islam and Hinduism. Yeah, and this research team organized a lot of workshops even during the pandemic. Buddhist monasteries and political power, remains and memories of Buddhists in Islamizing West Asia, and domestic meeting, and Buddhists and other religious communities in pre-modern Southeast Asia, with special reference to monasteries. And Buddhism and Shaivism in pre-modern Trans-Himalayan regions. This was held online and in person in Paris. And they also organized a reading session, very interesting one. Yeah, they read Sanskrit text and Tibetan text and Persian text at the same time and compared them. And the lecture series organized by this team. Yeah, these were organized jointly by Martin Luther University Halle-Wittenberg Oriental Institute. And the publication of Professor Baltas Raye from Halle in the series of Studia Indologica Universitatis Hallensis. And the proceedings of the above-mentioned lecture series, etc., will be published in the series of the same one, Studia Indologica Universitatis Hallensis, forthcoming. And I'll show you some of the flyers for these workshops and so on. Yeah, these are the flyers for the joint workshops. And this reading session was also very interesting, entitled Leading to Persian Episodes on the Buddha Composing Ilkhan Indira. I'll show you just a point, just the main point. Our sessions will read and compare the Buddha in Persian, the Devata Sutra, and the Maitreya Vyakarana in extant in Sanskrit and Tibetan, and their supposed counterparts in the Jami al-Tawarik in Persian, focusing on the two episodes on the Buddha. From the workshop's abstract by Professor Satoshi Ogura. Yeah, such a reading session can be regarded as a new attempt to examine how Buddhism in India was mentioned in Islamic texts. Raya for the workshop. Now we come to the conclusions of the project. In the first research term. When we discuss the decline of Indian Buddhism, it is crucial to distinguish between the following different aspects or levels. First, doctrinal aspect and secular aspect. Second, level of monastic institutions, level of individual Buddhists, including both monks and lay people. So regarding the doctrinal aspect, Professor Mitra mentions the emergence of esoteric Buddhism, Tantric Buddhism, as the primary cause of the decline. The blurring between Tantric Buddhism and Hinduism resulted in its identity. However, Buddhism had influential relationships with other religions from the outset on the Indian subcontinent. So, although syncretism itself is a crucial theme, we should hold back on using it as one of the criteria for the decline of Indian Buddhism. That was our conclusion. And we cannot overlook the decline of the Dharma as an argument concerning the doctrinal aspect. Such fear existed throughout the history of Indian Buddhism. For example, at the time of the Buddha's death and with the rise and fall of Mahayana Buddhism. And regarding the secular aspect, it is also true that we cannot consider the decline of Indian Buddhism separately from the secular and social aspect. There are various criteria for measuring the levels of the decline in terms of these aspects, as shown in the outcome of the project's different research teams. So the theory that Indian Buddhism has declined non-stop since the advent of Tantric Buddhism is no longer valid. So then what about the level of monastic institutions and level of individual Buddhists, including both monks and lay people? Professor Arthur Philip McKeown warns against the overemphasizing of Buddhist monasteries as a cornerstone of the history of Indian Buddhism. He emphasizes the need for studying the lives of Indian travelers who left their mark in Asian Buddhist regions because he argues that they recorded the gradual decline of Indian Buddhism. Nevertheless, there's no denying that the loss of the role and the activities of monasteries and networks between monasteries transform the history of Indian Buddhism. So we will need to consciously distinguish between the level of monastic institutions and that of individual Buddhists. Then let us proceed to the next stage, monasteries and security. The next aim of the Vihara project is to consider the relationship between Buddhist monasteries and security from the Gupta period onward. Then how should we deal with the concept of security? I'd like to propose to divide or understand the concept of security as consisting of the three elements, the following three elements, that is, laity, secular power, and Tantric Buddhism. They are closely related to one another, of course. And number one and number two had existed before the rise of number three, Tantric Buddhism, but we may also say that the secular aspect of Indian Buddhism clearly revealed itself with three, Tantric Buddhism. And there's also the problem of Shila Vinaya in monasteries. That is, whether Shila Vinaya of Hinayana, Mahayana can be compatible with Tantric concepts such as Samaya inside of monasteries in India and in neighboring regions. I'm sorry, yeah, I wrap up my arguments. And both number one, number two committed themselves to number three in Indian Buddhism from the Gupta period onward. And relevant issues are monasteries and tantric siddhas as related to laity and monasteries and secular powers, not only dynasties, but also local polities, as Professor Amar remarks. And such a scheme, fragmentation and defragmentation in the operating system of the history of Indian Buddhism may be also useful. And how to analyze each concept. This way, and secular power, not only major dynasties, but also local polities. And regarding Tantric Buddhism, yeah, what is important is the relationship with kingship, secular power, etc. Of course, yeah, regarding Tantric Buddhism, there are so many other issues. And let me introduce some of the arguments of scholars in India just briefly. Professor Umakant Mishra from Ravenshaw University, Vajrayana Buddhism, studying social iconography. This is one of my favorite books. Yeah, he divides between these two levels, the social regions. That is from bottom of top. And the second one, the Buddhist Vihara, elaborates structures less embedded with various micro and meso regions. That is from top to bottom. And this is his statement. And he also states that Buddhist monasticism was a big handicap in this regard. And the following factors could be added to Professor Mishra's clear-cut explanation. First one is Siddha in Tantric Buddhism as individual, and Mata in the Hinduism as an institutional basis for Hindu society community. And Professor Birendranath Prasad from JNU also emphasizes the necessity of dividing between two levels, the context of macro, subcontinental generalizations, and the context of micro study of a select subregion. And his recent publication is this one, Archaeology of Religion in South Asia, Buddhist, Brahmanical and Jaina religious centers in Bihar and Bengal. Yeah, finally, I'd like to mention Professor Amar's recent research in Japan. Yeah, this was based on the JSPS the title was an interdisciplinary study of Bodh Gaya. I was a host researcher. And he delivered 4 lectures and interacted with Japanese researchers in different research fields during his stay in Japan. And it is hoped that this research, which was relevant to the Bihara Project 2, will promote international interdisciplinary studies on Bodh Gaya. And the research results will also be incorporated in his forthcoming publications. I'll show you the flyers for his lectures briefly. So thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Studies. Until recently, ICCR Chair in Indian Studies at the Russian State University for the Humanities, Moscow. Is also Honorary Distinguished Fellow at the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies and a visiting Senior Fellow in Center for Policy Research. Professor Ghoshal is a doyen in Southeast Asian Studies program in India. He has published extensively on Indonesian politics, Asian and regional security issues. He reads, writes, and speaks Malay and Bahasa Indonesia, also published on Indian and Bangladesh politics and foreign policy. His most recent publication are a book on India-Indonesian relations published by the Institute of South Asian Studies, Singapore, and a monograph on China's perception of India's Look East policy brought out by the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis, New Delhi. Welcome, sir. The floor is yours.
Is working? Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you. And I must thank Sanjay for bringing me here after 50 years. Because first time I came was in 1973 as a much younger person. That's why I was very keen that I must come and see how Bodh Gaya has developed over the years. I think after such a long and very comprehensive lecture, the need of the hour is brevity in presentation. So I'll be very brief. Sometimes, almost like the iconic Elizabeth Taylor had been with her many husbands, as brief as that. I think sometimes I'll also be more telegraphic kind of thing, so that if there are any questions, I'll elaborate on those themes. I wouldn't speak anything on Buddhism as such, because that has been taken over, done by many of my earlier speakers. My main thrust is actually on the question of India-Japan relations and how Buddhism acted as a connect or played an important role in that relationship over the years. I think over the last 2 decades, India-Japan relations have developed into a trajectory which can be called very deep, stretching into various areas of cooperation, strategic, economic, and culture. While the main focus is on strategic and economic relations between India and Japan, I think culture also plays an important role in that relationship. I don't think there is any forum on India-Japan relations where Buddhism and culture are not mentioned. So that's why I think I need to look back at this whole thing and how culture played an important role in that relationship. I think it was Japan, not so much India, which used culture and heritage and Buddhism as a medium through which the relations could be established. And here comes my own experience in 1973. When I came to Bodh Gaya, it was a Diwali night. There were power cuts for 20 hours. Completely dark at night. Anyway, next morning I went to the Mahabodhi temple. And what I observed, interestingly, is that Hindu priests are performing Pindodana to the devotees. I think people who came to Gaya, some of them came to Bodh Gaya to see the place, to know that it is a Buddhist heritage center. But I think Buddhism was not much talked about during that period. And it was more kind of ritualistic kind of thing that was taking place. The place was Bodh Gaya, and particularly the Mohammadi temple at that time was the only place. Around this place there was hardly anything at that point of time. So even if we talked about Buddhism as our cultural heritage, this did not reflect very much in our diplomacy in the, say, 50s, in the 60s, or even 70s. And although culture was much talked about. And I'll also, again, not in the case of Japan, but my own experience in writing the book on India-Indonesia relations. I have seen some of the declassified documents of the Ministry of External Affairs of that period, during the 60s, early 50s, and all that. In the 60s particularly, and also in the late 50s, there were two ambassadors in Indonesia, Indian ambassadors, who were writing extensively, dispatches, sending dispatches to the ministry, that politics, economics cannot really build relationship between India and Indonesia. The way we must try to develop this relationship is based on culture, emphasize on our earlier traditions and how the unity and diversity concept in India and Vineka Tunggal Eka, which is the same meaning in the case of Indonesia. You know, the word is Sanskrit. That culture should be the main basis through which we must develop our conviviality and the relationship between the two countries. The people in the Ministry of Culture, one of them became very famous in India and became the bearers of Indian culture everywhere. I wouldn't mention the name right now. It was she. She just brushed aside those recommendations. And the two very well-known ambassadors, Badruddin Tayyabji, and the second one was, I'm forgetting his name right now, Keralite gentleman who lived in Indonesia even before independence. Anyway, the name will come. So we paid, I mean, it was platitudes about culture, but actually culture was never understood in the way it should be understood. Rituals, performing arts, these were considered to be culture in India. Even till to date, Indian Council for Cultural Relations, indulges in defining culture in those terms. Performing arts, dancers, and musicians, and things like that. Culture is a way of life, diversity, how people react to a certain circumstance, how do they speak, the difference between the peoples. We talk about our Indian traditions in Southeast Asia, but there's a hell of a lot of difference in the culture between Indians and those people. Originally, of course, it comes from India, but at the same time, they have evolved it according to their own needs and refined it, much more refined than what we see in India. We talk about our Indian culture in those countries, but we do not talk about the genius, the local genius that had really developed some of those cultural artifacts and the heritages. Angkor Wat, Borobudur, Prambanan, all these are living testimony of the local genius. The ideas came from India, but they have evolved it, sort of tried to mold it according to their own traditions. There is a saying in Bahasa Indonesia that it's like an orange. You take the essence as well as the juice, leave out the rest of it. So they also adapted Indian culture and other traditions accordingly. And these variations is also very essential in order to understand how we try to use culture as a soft power diplomacy. So the idea about using culture came much later. In 1960, when particularly in relation to India-Japan relations, the visit of the Crown Prince and the Princess, that was the first time it gave a major impetus to the cultural relationship. And Prince Akito and Michiko, Crown Princes, visited Bodh Gaya in December 1960. 1962, UNESCO gave recognition to Mahabodhi Society as a cultural heritage center. And then we sort of began to think, and Japanese organizations, Overseas Economic Reconstruction, as well as Japanese International Bank, they played an important role in developing these areas. The impetus did not come from India. The impetus came from the outside world. And for many years, it became more sort of a kind of a platitude about cultural relationship and all that. And maybe the government thought that religion was something in India that must not be talked very much because it might divide the population along religious lines. I think it is the present government which has started consciously to develop. It has its own compulsions in terms of consolidation of its power. So I think it was they who first started talking about these cultural things in a much bigger way. And I think Panchasila has been replaced now, Panchamrit, by Modi's doctrine of, Sanman, Sambada, then Sanskriti, Samriddhi, Shabhata, and all these kind of things. These are beautiful ideas, and this could be translated into various kinds of ways to cement the bond between India and the rest of this region. But the army through which you try to implement some of these ideas into the rest of the world sometimes are not good. Indian Council for Cultural Relations try to, post people in some of these countries as cultural officer. They are bureaucratic. Because somebody as superintendent in the ICCR must get a foreign posting, so he has to be posted in some country, maybe culture and how that should be used in order to bring about the kind of relationship that we expect. Now, the point that I'm trying to drive at, that we talk about culture as a connect, but then we do not try to implement them in terms of the values and the kind of understanding the target party has about that culture. Japanese are very aesthetic. The way they sort of have their flower shows, the various kinds of art forms that they try to display, particularly after the post-war period, because of the militarism that Japan had to project an image of a kind of a peaceful country. So the concept of Buddhism, like nonviolence, equality, and and the dialogical approaches, that really made an appeal to the rest of the world, and the Japanese used that. All the places that you preserve in India, and if you compare the preservation method in the rest of Southeast Asia, where we talk about our Indian culture being sort of, be demonstrated. Go to Borobudur. Go to Angkor Wat. The way they have preserved those areas, surrounding areas, no poverty along those areas. No beggars, no touts roaming around. But in the case of India, you go to any of this. Yesterday I went to Mahabodhi Society. Now, of course, because of the military and the police and other things, the place has been quite sort of kept well. but the touts and other things are roaming around, and that makes a very bad impression, not only on me as an Indian, because I've seen how they treat their tourist places and how they preserve their tourist places. And the comparison that we have in India is sometimes appalling. Now, I'm speaking very hard things, but I think after all the platitudes and some of these things that we hear everywhere, we understand culture as more rituals, not spiritual. Spiritual is something that appeals to the people. I went to Bali at a very young age of 22 when I was doing my field research. The first evening, through the terraced rice fields, I was staying in the campus of the Udayana University with a professor of English. And the rice terraced field and the gamelan that was played in the evening, the music that flowed through those terraced rice fields suddenly gave me a feeling that I'm a Hindu. I think for the first time, I felt I'm a Hindu. Otherwise, I've taken this as given. I'm a Brahmin, that's a given thing. I'm a Hindu, is a given thing. But the spiritual experience that you really experience in this environment, that gives you a feeling of your culture and your traditions. That time. When back in 1999, all around the place was dirty, people are sort of, excreting and things of that sort. Now, even if you talk about culture, soft power diplomacy, this thing matters quite a lot, how people perceive you. So, the point that I'm trying to drive at is that culture, diplomacy, religion, spiritualism, all this need to be viewed sometimes from the context of the target country's perception about us and how these things need to be preserved. And that gives you a much better sort of, at least I was quite impressed with how the Mahabodhi society, Mahabodhi temple has been preserved, quite clean and all that. However, the outside environment wasn't very congenial. I mean, I have seen Borobudur almost 30 times, if not more, because I go to Indonesia very often. I've been traveling from the 60s to that country. And I've seen Borobudur was not very looked after at that time because it was a political turmoil period. There was a communist, as they call it, communist upheaval, but which was actually a sort of conflict between the two wings of the army. But anyway, that's a different question altogether. So it was not possible for them to make an upkeep of those places. But over the period, I have seen how they have sort of, preserved the place and sort of separated shops and other things far away from the actual cultural centers, so that you don't feel disturbed by, all those things which are not religious or which are not part of your cultural sort of traditions and things of that. So the point that I'm trying, again, emphasizing is that if we have to use Buddhism as part of our cultural heritage, we need to understand some of the essential precepts of Buddhism, the cultural aspects, how others have adapted that cultural sort of traits, and how we can sometimes learn also from them. I think I'll be finishing here, and I'll be open to answering questions. And I thought time needs to be kept. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Without further delay, we will move on with the next talk. Dr. Tungchingmang Langel, Research Fellow at the Indian Council of World Affairs. He'll be speaking on exploring the Buddhist connection in the context of India's Act East policy and Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific strategy. To briefly introduce the speaker, Dr. Langel is a research fellow at the Indian Council of World Affairs. He did his PhD in Indo-Pacific Studies from School of International Studies, JNU. His PhD is on Japan and India's converging security interests in the Indo-Pacific. Prior to joining ICWA, he has worked with reputed think tanks and organizations such as the National Maritime Foundation, the Foundation for National Security Research, and the Confederation of Indian Industry. His current areas of research interest focus on the geopolitics of Northeast Asian countries like Japan, Korean Peninsula, and Taiwan within the Indo-Pacific. Welcome, Dr. Langel. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Professor Taikan Kyuma, Professor Baladas Kushal, Mr. Sanjay Kumar, distinguished guests, experts, scholars, and students, a very good afternoon to all present in this conference. And first of all, on behalf of the Indian Council of World Affairs, I would like to convey our compliments to the organizers, Deshkal Society, for hosting the 5th edition of the Bodh Gaya Global Dialogues. ICWA and Deshkal Society has had a long association. We even have an MOU that was signed on January 8, 2020. And as one of the oldest think tank of India, advocating India's foreign policy perspectives in world affairs, ICWA is excited to be able to contribute to Deshkal Society's esteemed platform for reflections and insights in the 5th Bodh Gaya Global Dialogue. Today I'll be speaking on the topic exploring the Buddhist connection in the context of India's Act East policy and Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific strategy. I'll try to be brief, and I also want to say that I am honored to be one of the panelists among the much acclaimed professors from Japan and India on the subject of international affairs. So without further ado, I'll just begin my sharing of the talk. So the relationship between India and Japan has been shaped by a shared cultural heritage, particularly the common roots, which is in Buddhism, and Buddhism which originated in ancient India and spread to Japan in the 6th century, where it had a profound impact on Japanese culture, philosophy, and society. In recent years, the two countries have recognized the importance of their cultural connections and have made efforts to strengthen their bilateral relationship through various initiatives. This talk explores the Buddhist connection between India and Japan. So in a post-COVID-19, post-Galwan era and the global shocks caused by the Russia-Ukraine conflict, sustaining regional multilateralism has become even more crucial, and it requires more than building alliances for political expediency. It necessitates sharing a common worldview shaped by various factors such as socio-economic, geopolitical, and geostrategic considerations. At its core lies a cultural foundation with a history dating back over 1,000 years. And we can see that the implicit recognition of the dharmic roots in large parts of ASEAN nations also has kept the people-to-people interactions warm since their independence. So moreover, in the era of a multipolar world, India has the potential to go further by reimagining itself as the cultural homeland for the region's Buddhists, whose philosophy and practices are closely linked with India's many religions. The Buddhist circuits, as part of the Indian government thematic tourist circuits, have been serving as pillars of the Act East policy, boosting the domestic economy. And in December 2015, when the Japan-India Vision 2025 was released, it stated that the peoples of Japan and India are guided by common cultural traditions, including the heritage of Buddhism and shared commitment to the ideals of democracy, tolerance, pluralism, and open society. Recently, on 20th March 2023, Prime Minister Fumio Kishida of Japan was invited to the Buddha Jayanti Park in Delhi by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, which further underscores the importance the two countries emphasize upon embracing the aspects of Buddhism connecting Japan and India. It was during this visit that Prime Minister Fumio Kishida also revealed his new plan for a free and open Indo-Pacific. The new plan had set forth 4 pillars of cooperation for a free and open Indo-Pacific. The third pillar was on multi-layered connectivity, in which the Prime Minister of Japan identified South Asia, specifically recognizing India's northeast as having an unexploited potential. He even spoke of promoting a Bay of Bengal Northeast industrial value chain concept to foster the growth of the entire region. This particular focus of the third pillar of the free and open Indo-Pacific converges with India's Act East policy. So the Act East policy of India, which was launched, previously known as the Look East policy, so it was relaunched by the Indian government in 2014 with the aim of promoting strategic economic, political, and cultural ties with Southeast Asia and East Asia. And the policy recognized the strategic importance of the Indo-Pacific region and sought to strengthen India's engagement with its neighbors, including Japan. So the Buddhist connection between India and Japan is an important element of the Act East policy. India has undertaken several initiatives to promote Buddhist tourism and cultural exchange also with Japan. For instance, in 2018, India launched the Buddhist circuit train that covers several important Buddhist sites in India, including Bodh Gaya, Rajgir, and Kushinagar, with the aim of attracting Buddhist pilgrims from India, Japan, and other countries. In October 2019, the Indian Railways ran its inaugural Buddhist circuit train over 8 days, connecting the city of Lord Buddha's birth, Lumbini in Nepal, to over a dozen sites, including the place where he achieved enlightenment, Bodh Gaya, gave his first sermon, Sarnath, and attained Nirvana, Kushinagar. The journey interspersed with stops at key seats of learning like Nalanda and Rajgir, which many centuries ago also hosted students and scholars from as far as Korea and Japan. Similarly, the Buddhist circuit example is being extended to regional hubs of certain northeast states such as Sikkim, Arunachal Pradesh, Manipur. India's frontier states are being transformed into gateways for collaboration through projects such as the Trilateral Highway that will connect India to Myanmar, Thailand, and even Vietnam. Besides facilitating access, such initiatives taken from the example of the Buddhist circuit stands to improve bilateral trade and act as a strategic counterbalance to China's Belt and Road Initiative. As a country plays host to both domestic and foreign tourists, efforts are on to provide seamless connectivity and high-quality hospitality services, and there appears little dearth in overseas funding to support this plan, with Japan and even the World Bank keen to invest. So now we come to Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific strategy, which was launched in 2016. It aims to promote economic development, maritime security, and rule of law in the Indo-Pacific region. The strategy emphasizes the importance of promoting cultural exchange and people-to-people ties in the region. The Buddhist connection is an important element of Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific. Japan has supported several initiatives to promote Buddhist tourism and cultural exchanges with India. For instance, since 2014, Japan launched the Visit Japan Year campaign, which included a special focus on promoting cultural exchange and tourism between Japan and India. Japan has made significant contributions to diplomacy through Buddhism by promoting peace, cultural exchange, and humanitarian aid in various parts of the world. Some examples of their contributions through Buddhism diplomacy will be like supporting Buddhist cultural exchange, humanitarian aid through Buddhist organizations such as Zuchi and Rishoko Sekai, which have been providing humanitarian aid to people affected by natural disasters and conflicts in many countries. Their efforts have been helping to alleviate suffering and promote peace and goodwill, promoting interfaith dialogue, and hosting international Buddhist conferences. Japan has hosted several international Buddhist conferences as well, such as the World Buddhist Forum and the World Buddhist Summit. So these conferences have provided platform for dialogue and exchange among Buddhist scholars and leaders from different countries and traditions. Also, the recently released new plan for the free and open Indo-Pacific by Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, in which the first pillar mentions principles for peace and rules for prosperity as a backbone of the FOIP, the free and open Indo-Pacific. So Prime Minister Kishida spoke of a need to collectively reaffirm minimum basic principles to build peace and reconstruct itself, including providing assistance to Ukraine based on the tenets of dialogue and cooperation. Overall, Japan's contribution through Buddhism diplomacy have helped to promote peace, understanding, and cooperation among nations, as well as provide assistance to those in need. So what is the significance of the Buddhist connection? Between India and Japan, it has emerged as a critical component of their bilateral relationship. Both countries recognize the importance of their shared cultural heritage and the potential of cultural exchange to strengthen their relationship. Buddhism has played a significant role in shaping values and traditions of both India and Japan. The teachings of the Buddha emphasize compassion, non-violence, and the pursuit of wisdom, which are shared values, again, between the two countries. In addition, Buddhism has also contributed to the economic development of both countries through Buddhist tourism. The Buddhist circuit in India and the numerous Buddhist sites in Japan attract thousands of tourists every year, contributing to the local economies of both countries. Japan and India share the universal values of Buddhist traditions and democracy and cooperation between the two countries, which possess the spirit of tolerance that will contribute to peace and stability in the region. What are the challenges and opportunities? Now, while the Buddhist connection between India and Japan holds immense potential for strengthening their relationship, there are challenges that needs to be addressed. One is the language barrier, as most Japanese tourists visiting India do not speak English or Hindi. This can hinder their experience of the local culture and limit their interaction with locals. Another challenge is a lack of infrastructure and amenities at some of these Buddhist sites, particularly in India. The government needs to invest more in improving the facilities and services at these sites to attract more tourists and promote the Buddhist connection. Buddhism impact in this region can be linked to the belief in Tibetan Buddhism in Mongolia and Bhutan, and in Theravada Buddhism in Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Thailand, Laos, and Cambodia. One of the things that all of these countries have in common is that they are all currently under some sort of influence of China, both politically and economically. Even though China has a past of persecuting Buddhists during the Cultural Revolution, it has been promoting the religion as a soft power strategy for the region. Therefore, India and Japan face a strategic challenge in China's attempt at Buddhist diplomacy. So India and Japan have repeatedly affirmed the existence of shared values in Asia that embrace the rule of law and democracy, with the relationship between Hinduism and Buddhism as a starting point. Additionally, India and Japan's foreign policy approach through Buddhism can be based on a strategic intent with a view to serving as a check against China from the aspect of misappropriating the Buddhist identity. Japan captures such premises positively, and on top of that, is considered to be supportive of such moves from the perspectives of values such as rule of law and democracy. The Buddhist connection between India and Japan is an important element of their bilateral relationship. Both countries have recognized the potential of cultural exchange and tourism to strengthen their relationship and have undertaken several initiatives to promote the Buddhist connection. However, there are challenges, as I have already addressed, such as the language barrier, lack of infrastructure, and the strategic challenge offered by China's attempts. By overcoming these challenges, the two countries can further strengthen their relationship and promote peace and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Langal. And I would like to thank Professor Taikan Kuma again for joining us online, Professor Ghoshal for being here, and Dr. Langal. Now, I would request all of us to move for lunch. Lunch will be served till 2, and then we will come back for the next session.
My question is, what can you forecast about the Indo-Japan relation regarding the Buddhism for next 2 decades on the basis of your study and experiences? No, Dr. Langal.
This on? I think this, I myself have not been much of the scholar for the cultural aspect of Indo-Japan relations, but more of the strategic aspect. I can see that strategically that India-Japan relations will be going stronger for the next decade or two, definitely. But from the cultural aspect, I think Professor Ghoshal will be the best person to add to that.
I think there are two things. One, of course, is that emphasize our cultural heritage of Bodh Gaya. And I would suggest that, like Muslims go to Makkah for their annual pilgrimage, or for that matter, for their sort of, pilgrimage. Why not turn Bodh Gaya as an annual event on Buddha Purnima for all the Buddhists to come and celebrate their relationship with India, as well as the cultural and spiritual aspect of Buddhism. Now, for that, I think we need to develop this area also in terms of this, development of the city, the various sort of, other kinds of development like industrial development of this area. Because tourism and culture can go together only if there is good infrastructure, as well as the development of, the facilities all around. So the people can come and not only enjoy the spiritual experience, but also the physical comforts, as well as a better living in these areas. So I would say that one way by which India's cultural heritage of Bodh Gaya can be presented to the rest of the world is to organize an annual event every year on Buddha Purnima and invite the Buddhists from the rest of this region, like Myanmar, Thailand, Japan, South Korea, and many of them, Vietnam, and they would really love to be here during that time. But only thing is that we also need to devote a little more time in terms of the development of the infrastructure. Like, for example, JICA, Japan International sort of Cooperation Agency, they are helping the development of the Ajanta Ellora, that site, and also around areas. And in fact, the Japanese have recommended in that project that the whole area not only needs to be developed in terms of living better places and things of that sort, but there should also be the industrial development so that there is all-around prosperity, not only spiritually, but also economically. And see, I have an idea that culture cannot prosper unless there is economic prosperity. You will see in the history of the world, European Renaissance or Indian Renaissance also for that matter, happened in the 19th century. And the 19th century was also a great area for entrepreneurship, Indian entrepreneurship in Bengal and other parts of India. So I think economic development and culture should go together. And that's why we need to give greater attention to development of infrastructure in these areas and improving the living conditions of the people around this place through industrial development and providing better facilities. Only then, I think, the meaning of Bodh Gaya would be realized to the rest of the world as a spiritual experience rather than any rituals sort of thing. Thank you.
We'll take just one more question because then we'll take a break for lunch.
Sir, can we imagine a good relation between India and Japan without celebrating the Buddhism? Is it possible?
In the last 10 years, Indo-Japanese relations have developed on different lines altogether, economic as well as strategic. Because of the rise of China, both fear India and Japan as China as a major threat. Even culturally, Buddhism is almost sort of taken away from India by China. And they have been establishing institutions all over the world to promote their culture and representing their emerging as the sort of the spring from where all the Buddhist things have emerged. And they are completely, because of their economic strength, they can use their checkbook diplomacy and other things. That's why they are emerging as a much greater kind of promoter of Buddhism rather than India. And to a certain extent, it may not sound very good, but India woke up to using Buddhism as a soft power because of the Chinese threat. I mean, these things will not be palatable to people who are promoting Buddhism in this country, but that's the fact. That's the truth. Because India really has the much greater heritage of Buddhism. But India did not try to do that initially. So China used that opportunity, and they were trying to promote, institutions, inviting people to their country, showing all their sort of artifacts and other things. It is only then India woke up to the whole thing. Now, I think India should be using cultural diplomacy also as one of the elements through which India can build better relationship with the rest of the world, and particularly the Japanese. Because Japanese are culturally very rich, and it strikes a familiar chord if we use culture and Buddhism. But our main thrust of the relationship would depend on strategic and economic areas because of the rise of China and the threat that it poses to the rest of the region. And that's why you see much greater emphasis on, Quad, the 4 countries that have come together: United States, Japan, Australia, and India. And India is a linchpin in that strategy, because India and Japan are the Asian countries in that sense of the term, whereas the others are Westerns in their perception of the people. So I think relationship can develop on other lines, but if culture is mixed with it, it brings a much greater sort of, blend. And it becomes much more appealing to various sections of the people. Some people would like strategic, some people would like economic, some would like also that culture should be the basis of your interaction, dialogues, the very essence of Bodh Gaya dialogue. That's essential part of Buddhism. And India has been doing that, of course, now. Conclave, year after year, they're doing it. They started from 2015. I haven't gone so much into details of that because of the paucity of time. But I think culture should be also an integral part of that relationship between India and Japan.
Is it a pressing question or can we move on? Okay, thank you so much, Professor Kumar, Professor Ghoshal, and Dr. Langal for joining us today for this session. And I request all of us to move for lunch and rejoin us for the next session in the same hall at 2 p.m. Thank you.